currently working within the banking division, particularly heading up a banking division, that then go on to work for the banks. In terms of, in many private sector companies, it was garden leave and the likes would be commonplace. Just wondering, what are the rules in place, and are you reviewing those rules at the moment?
I mentioned earlier the composition of the banking unit, so that in many ways confuses things a little bit, at least makes it more difficult to resolve easily. The people that are in the banking unit, or indeed frankly in the rest of the department, that are civil servants, are subject to the normal rules that would apply to civil servants in respect of that. And I know there have been some changes in respect. I think there's a suggestion, or maybe it already being the case, that I'm supposed to spend at least 2 years not working with any sort of conflict situation after I would leave my position. And so those rules apply for the civil servants that are in there. Yes. John Corrigan, I think, spoke at the Finance Committee about the review that he's conducting. Yes. with respect to the people that he has under in his area. We have actually started to think about whether there needs to be anything specific to that situation, given the nature of our situation, and asked, for example, our colleagues in the UK as to how they handle the issues. But I think we can focus on the conflict that exists in the banking unit as a sort of a particular one that has focus, but in some respects the same conflicts apply in almost everything that we do as sort of broad people looking at the economy, in that if people leave our department and go into work in a professional firm, one could say that I think this is a new issue for the civil service to grapple with, because we have started from a position of encouraging people to come in from outside into the civil service, as opposed to before, where that was less frequent. And I think as a consequence of that, we're going to see more people leaving as well as we go through the situation. And we've already seen a number of people leaving in the department in the last couple of months, which is in many ways reflecting that.
No, and I take that point, and I think the influx of new people to a department, to any walk of life, is a good thing. But this is, I suppose, the reverse. And I'm just wondering, if you have people working particularly in the current climate, these aren't normal times. It's the difference between your peacetime unit and I suppose the wartime that we're at in terms of our financial crisis. When you have people working in a very sensitive area, which is relatively, and hopefully will remain unique, do you have a view on the appropriate time period which should elapse between that person working in a sensitive area, such as the banking unit, engaging with banks that have significant public stakes, and then going to actually become on the payroll of that bank?
Yeah,
I think that's really the question.
I mean, a specific view, I think, means you have to look at each individual situation. But I can imagine a scenario where if I were to express a view, as seems to be suggested, that I'm going to deal with it on a personal basis because it's easier, because that I should have 2 years where I don't actually work in anything of conflict. I imagine there may be some questions raised here. If we followed the practice which applies in private sector, where you want to do this, of somebody paying me for so-called gardening leave for 2 years to sit at home, might actually raise some additional questions. And so I think this is a delicate balance that needs to be taken. I think we have very strict rules in terms of confidentiality, in terms of use of information that people have. As Anne mentioned, as soon as we were aware of it, as Michael sort of, announced that he was leaving, he had already been out of the department for a number of weeks in any event because he was on holidays, and we asked him to sort of, desist from actually engaging in any files that would cause any lack of conflict.
And I'm very clear, I'm not questioning the integrity of anybody here, and I'm sure.
But it is a very serious issue. We need to look at.
What I want to know is, if I work today in the banking unit, can I leave the banking unit and work in a commercial in a bank tomorrow that is state owned?
Subject to the notice periods that we currently have in the contracts, yes.
Okay, and that's different to those that work in the NTMA.
Both would have the same issues. I mean, the NTMA would have a period of contract notice that they have to give, the NTMA employees, and in effect, people that would retire from our system would have the same. I think what we have is the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform have tried to look at this issue as we see more flexibility in terms of people coming in and out of the service. So we're really dealing with a new issue in that respect, and have come up with new guidelines that they're working through as to what that might mean. At the extreme, suggesting that some people might need 2 years before they can actually work in a situation that would create a sense of conflict.
Okay, so the NTMA is formally reviewing its guidelines at the moment.
And the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform is looking at those for the civil service.
Okay. Okay. That's fine. The issue of the issue of bankers' pay. I understand the department commissioned a review by Mercer. Can you just let me know when that was commissioned and the terms of reference of that report?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't have the terms of reference with me, but they are looking at bankers' pay. It was commissioned in November, as far as I can remember, and I can send you the terms of reference.
Thank you very much.
After it. I think they're probably on our website.
Okay, and
but I'll send them to you anyway.
That report is completed now, is it?
The report we expect to go to government shortly, and
It's with the minister at the moment.
yes.
Okay.
Or there's I'm not sure whether it's the final draft or the semi-final draft. That's with the minister.
Sure, no problem. I mean, this is an issue that comes up time and time again, and obviously it's come up at a European level in relation to bonuses, and there's been significant progress, or if progress is the right word, in my view, progress on that recently. But I'm wondering, Mr. Moran, if you have a view on the balance between attracting talent into our banking sector versus reasonable cost. And I make this point in the context of the fact that we now have 3,000 staff working in our 4 bailed out banks who are earning more than €100,000 a year. And I think we have about 27 of them that are on salaries in addition of €500,000. Now, we have obviously paid, we as a nation, a huge cost in relation to these bailed out banks. And I'm just wondering what your thought is, and based on your own external experience as well, what viewpoint you bring in relation to what's the correct balance between trying to attract talent and also trying to protect the taxpayer?
Well, it's certainly a very difficult issue, right? I'm getting all the difficult questions today. The reason, when we asked I mean, I've seen an earlier draft of the Mercer's report, and I think one of the questions we asked them to look at was to gauge the remuneration in our state-owned banks against those of the broader sector. So, because I think one thing that's important is that we can continue to deal with the state-owned banks or the government-supported banks, which would therefore include Bank of Ireland, in a way that doesn't create a disadvantage for them. And so if in fact there are dichotomies of pay between the state-owned banks and those in the broader banking sector or financial services sector, I think it's something we need to look at. On the other hand, we have got banks at the moment that are still not returned to profitability. And therefore, I think that needs to be taken into account when the management of the banks look at the road to profitability that we were encouraged them to go to make sure that they are in effect treating the compensation issue with that backdrop against the situation. I mean, we have this situation in a lot of other areas and other sectors, clearly, because the competition is also not just between people working for the state-owned banks and the broader financial services, but frankly going to join any of the other industry sectors that are, more common at the moment.
Okay. And you expect the report to go to Cabinet shortly, in the next couple of weeks?
Yes.
Yeah.
Next couple of weeks.
Okay, that's fine. Can I move on to the issue of your revised strategy statement? And I suppose it's extremely appropriate that you're revising your strategy, and very welcome to reflect the changing times. But I mean, I read some of the goals in the strategy, and they're ambitious, and nobody in politics should criticise government departments for having ambition. But just the goal 3, I think, talks about an improvement in the living standards of our citizens, and it also talks about a fair resolution of the problems of excess debt of citizens. Now, obviously, this is a strategy up to 2014, and I'd struggle to meet many of my constituents who feel they're going to have had or expect to have in that period of time an improved standard of living. And I think the nub of this is because, as you quite correctly note in the statement, it's linked to the need for the fair resolution of the problems of excess debt. And you go on in relation to the strategy to talk about 2 areas, distressed mortgages and sustainable levels of personal and mortgage debt. And I'm just wondering, firstly, if we can just talk about the 2 of these, how many distressed mortgages? Firstly, just for the purpose of clarity, if you could outline the definition of a distressed mortgage, and then if you could just clarify what the department's estimate of the number of distressed mortgages in Ireland currently is.
Okay. I think the parameter that most people are looking at in respect of mortgages, as distressed as you refer to them, is essentially the inability of people to pay. And therefore, they are bucketed in effect in 3 different buckets by the central bank, who provide the statistics on this, as to people that have fallen into arrears. So therefore, they would be in what is referred to as the 0 to 90-day category. people that are in the greater than 90-day category, which in effect reflects a sort of an inability to, or an unwillingness to pay the mortgage over a period of longer than three months, which suggests a growing and more serious problem. And then people who have been in that situation for greater than 6 months. So there's 3 buckets that people look at and that we therefore analyse, because in a way we get the statistics then from the central bank for all 3 buckets on a consistent basis. I think the number is actually going to be released sometime later this morning by the central bank, who are releasing the latest statistics. So that's probably it'll probably happen while we're here, I suppose. So we can come back to that. But I mean, essentially, we're talking of somewhere in the region of about 15% of the sort of balance of mortgages are in the greater than sort of 90-day amount, and 11% or so if you do by number, a little over 11%.
Sorry, the 11% is in the 6 months plus? Or
is in the greater than 90 days, which would include the other category as well. So what we are, in terms of monitoring these, what happens is we have seen a significant attention given to the banks in the last couple of months to the collection process.
Yes.
And in a way, the first priority for the banks had to be to identify at the beginning of the process, because the risk is that if somebody stays in arrears for too long without having it dealt with, that in effect the problem gets worse rather than better. And so we have encouraged them to try and work particularly hard on the 0 to 90-day bucket, so that we can see in effect a reduction there, which stems the flow of significant new mortgages getting into arrears problems. And in doing so, to more actively than was the case beforehand, focus on the financial statements that come in from the customers, to understand those customers that are genuinely in a situation where they are able to pay and should be paying their mortgage and are just taking advantage of the hiatus. Those people who are suffering what we, in many ways, we would refer as a temporary shock to their system. So, for example, a loss of employment of one or both members of the household would mean that you have to find a temporary solution pending the resumption of employment. Okay. And those people who have much more deeply bedded problems, so where, for example, they are in a sector, for example, construction, where incomes tended to be high and a lot more people were in that, and by moving back into employment, they may find themselves in a lower income bracket going forward, and therefore the mortgage is just unsustainable.
Okay. And there's an area here we've had a lot of talk, and we're going to have more talk, and I believe we're going to have targets very shortly, which I welcome, and you might just comment on that in a moment. I know Governor Honohan has made comments on it. Should we be setting specific targets? But there's a group I'm concerned about. There's an awful lot of people in this country who didn't get mortgages from banks. They got mortgages from mortgage companies. And without naming them, we all know the names, and they had the ads on the television at the time, and people borrowed excessive sums and received excessive sums. And they generally were people that weren't eligible in many cases to even get a mortgage during the boom times, if you like, when mortgages weren't that hard to get. I'm just wondering, is there any way that the Irish, well, firstly, sorry, do you have any estimation of how many Irish mortgages or mortgages held by Irish people fall into that category, i.e. mortgages that aren't with Irish banks but are with mortgage companies?
I don't have the stats here, but I mean, and in fact, it would be difficult for me to release them because it would be by bank. So even though we do get some sight of those.
No, and I don't particularly mind which.
Yeah, I think it's almost more by category of bank than anything else.
I mean,
and for example, some companies like Permanent TSB have referred to the mortgages in certain books by category. So Springfield books are typically of a similar type as opposed to their normal mortgages. I think what we are seeing in those mortgages is that very often those institutions are taking the lead in implementing some of the other schemes that are in place, like the mortgage to rent scheme.
Okay.
Because in terms of the size of the houses and the income of the person, they are in many ways more typically suited for some of those schemes, like the mortgage to rent scheme, and we have therefore seen greater traction from those lenders over the course of the last 6 months in working through those schemes and making sort of using up the capacity from the Department of Environment in terms of moving people on in that respect.
Would you be able to send us a note on the amount in the category of mortgage companies?
We can try and do something that doesn't
I don't want to
disclose confidentiality.
I don't need commercial confidentiality, but I think it's an interesting one. I just want to move on to, because I know I'm tight on time and a bit more to ask you. In relation to IBRC, Was the liquidation of IBRC a quid pro quo for a deal on the pronotes? Because it's been very, I mean, we did it, we liquidated it at IBRC, but as the Secretary General of the Department of Finance, your understanding of the moves in Europe and everything else, was the liquidation an essential part of receiving a deal on the pronotes?
That's a slightly different question than quid pro quo, right? So
okay, we'll do both.
I might even rephrase it the third way. I think it was an integral part of finding a solution to a structure that was capable of not falling foul of the prohibition on monetary financing.
Okay, so let me try it a different way. In your view, would it have been possible to receive the deal we received without the liquidation of IBRC?
There may be another solution out there which we didn't think about, but I don't think that we would have easily found an alternative solution that would have sort of, not qualified under the Article 123 of the treaty without that feature.
No, I think that's useful. It's just useful to put that out there because it's obviously an issue. We've talked an awful lot at this committee before. I think we've even spoken with you, maybe on your first appearance here, about the issue of auditors and those that audit our banks. And Irish Nationwide was audited in the 3 years of 2006 to 2009 by KPMG. AIB was audited by KPMG in each of the years 2006 to 2011. KPMG is now the liquidator, the special liquidator for IBRC, which obviously encompasses Irish Nationwide. I've a number of questions on this. I mean, what was the criteria for establishing who should be the special liquidator for IBRC?
Okay, well, I think the first thing is there are two different sections. I mean, do you want to take this? And
yeah, just on the special liquidator, I mean, there were only a small number. I mean, it would be a great idea if we could go for auditors that had not audited any of the constituent companies, but there were, in fact, only a small number of auditors in the country who could possibly take on a liquidation of this size, which is very considerably large. And a number of those were absolutely conflicted, so we had to rule those out. And then we went, we couldn't obviously advertise or do a tender, which would be the ideal solution. So we went to our colleagues in NAMA, who had a tendered list of qualified liquidators who had tendered on that basis. And we picked KPMG from the list of tendering in NAMA and arranged that they would give us the same price as they had offered NAMA.
Okay. Just when you say that a number were absolutely conflicted,
people who are currently auditing Anglo, for example, or with whom Anglo have a legal case on the question of auditing.
Okay, so you were ruled out of being the special liquidator if Anglo is involved in legal action.
In certain types of legal action, yeah.
Or if you were currently auditing Anglo. Yeah. Okay, and the fee. What is the fee for KPMG acting as the special liquidator?
I think that's probably commercially sensitive, but it is on the rates that they tendered to NAMA, exactly on those rates.
Okay, do we have any estimation? There's been an awful lot of talk about staff in IBRC being transferred to NAMA. Do we have an estimation of how many staff will be required?
No, we don't have that estimation because it will depend on, as you know, all of the loans are going to be offered for sale to the general, to anyone who wants to bid for them. And the number of staff which NAMA will require will depend on how much of the loan book they actually acquire. So if they get all of it, they'll need far more staff than if they get half of it, for example.
Okay. And what was the process in deciding to transfer loans and assets to NAMA? Was there some sort of impact study done, or what was the decision in relation? What was the decision-making process in relation to deciding to transfer to NAMA?
Well, when the question was discussed on the possibility, and John has talked earlier about, we have looked at many options. We've been in discussions with the Troika on what to do about the promissory notes now for, well, over 12 months, probably
Sure.
a bit more than 12 months. And we looked at many different options. But when this particular option was being looked at, obviously, if we put in the IBRC into liquidation, you have to think of what will you do with the loans. Fire saling them would clearly not be to the state's advantage, since we had guaranteed the emergency liquidity arrangement with the floating charge the central bank had over the assets would be unlikely to be sufficient if they were fire sales. So we had to put some sort of floor on the sale to make sure that the price was held. So we considered briefly setting up a new NAMA type structure, but we decided on consultation, and obviously it's a policy decision in the end for the Minister, but the decision was taken by the Minister and ultimately by the Government that we would use the structure we already have, the organisation which is functioning to our satisfaction in the same field, and transfer the assets there.
Okay, and can you just explain I'm coming to the end now, Chairman. There was a report in the media, in the Sunday Business Post, on the 10th of February, saying that some loans of former Anglo executives, the likes of Sean Fitzpatrick, will not be transferred to NAMA and they'll remain with the liquidator due to special provision of the legislation. Can you just explain to me the rationale for that as well?
We felt that the value of those loans is not clear, and the timing in which they can be collected is not clear, because some of the cases against them are tied up with criminal cases, etc.,
Okay.
etc.
Okay.
And we felt it was that it was more appropriate that special liquidator would act for the company in those cases, and that they would be separated out from the plain recovery job which NAMA has, which is sort of a vanilla recovery of assets,
Okay.
similar to the job it already has.
And my very, very final question. If IBRC had engaged in the write-down of loans, was there a sanction sought from the Department of Finance or required for write-down of loans from IBRC?
In terms of the provisioning that they would do?
Well, in terms of, there's one example of a write-down of €105 million that would, of a loan from IBRC. Does the department have a role in approving such write-downs?
The IBRC's our relationship was covered by a relationship framework, which is available on the website.
So you would have had no role.
Only strategic, very strategically significant decisions would come in.
But not on any specific loan.
But not on individual cases.
No, the only thing that we would have been doing is obviously to the extent that the management were looking at blocks of loans, and we would have our team that would follow in effect what they were recommending on various loans and disposals of them. The provisioning is a matter for the actual management of the board themselves. We did attend some and would typically attend some of these meetings at which issues would be discussed. Like, for example, before Christmas I had a discussion with members of the board and some other people presenting on different blocks of business of the bank and how they might actually address whether they would sell or hold and things like that. And the provisioning would have come up in those discussions.
And would you have had a decision-making role in those meetings?
No. We were simply just there as an information. It wasn't a formal board meeting.
Okay.
It was just actually a sort of workshop, I suppose you would describe, where they.
Okay. Listen, thank you very much.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks, Deputy Harris. I will ask Deputy O'Donnell
And I believe Deputy Ross will return to come back in. Thank you, Chairman. What I'll do is I'll question Deputy Ross, his second question, then he'll come in and then I'll come back in later. I just want to touch on a few areas. I want to go back to Mr. Torpy, and it's just something, and you are working through it. When did Mr. Torpy transfer from NTMA to the banking unit within the Department of Finance?
From memory, I'm not sure. I would have been inclined. Well, there was actually a decision taken in early April, I think, or late March, to transfer the banking of 2011.
Okay.
2011 to transfer the banking unit to the department. What date exactly we completed the transfer, I'm not sure, and they physically, I know, did not move into the building of the department until after we had completed the Bank of Ireland July transaction. I recall that we did that one.
Would Mr. Torpy have been involved would he have had day-to-day dealings in terms with Bank of Ireland itself, we'll say, when he came over into the banking unit?
Yeah, no, Michael's role was head of the shareholder management unit, so in that respect he would have been responsible for the teams of people that were looking after the shareholding of the state in AIB, Bank of Ireland, permanent, in Irish Life and Permanent.
And so he would have been dealing on a day-to-day basis with Bank of Ireland.
Yep.
And subsequent to his, when he came, we'll say, he had holidays for, I think he went out on holidays on the 14th of December of last year, and he had a month holiday, and he gave you notice then when he came back. Has he been dealing with the department since he's joined Bank of Ireland in terms of representing Bank of Ireland on the various banking transactions?
I don't think he's actually officially joined Bank of Ireland yet. As in, I would be still on his garden
I
leave.
understand he's not starting with Bank of Ireland until either the 28th of March or the 1st of April coming.
I suppose the question really I'm leading to is, and it's obviously, and I know you're looking at the whole issue of corporates, and it's, this is just purely fleshing it out. The question is, from the public's viewpoint, looking in, that you had someone here who came in he headed up a division that dealt with shareholders within the banks, one of them being Bank of Ireland. He's now joining Bank of Ireland in terms of dealing with them. Will he be in a position whereby he can deal with you then in terms of representing Bank of Ireland? I suppose as by way of a term, he's going from a gamekeeper to a poacher. Will he be within his, will the procedures allow that to happen? That he'll be effectively dealing with people that he would have worked with in the division, in the department, we'll say 2 or 3 months earlier, or people that he possibly would have been over that would have reported.
To the extent that he's dealing with areas of his new responsibility, and we are concerned about those areas, yes, is the answer. He would be coming. Will he get an easier deal from us because of that? I don't think so. No.
I would have concerns in that, okay, and I understand in terms of operating in it. This is in no way about the individual or the department or in any way. But certainly in terms of something that is so specific, and so the whole restructuring in the banking sector here is unprecedented. And here we have an individual that was heading up a division which was dealing with the banks, and within a couple of months' time we'll say within a month's time, could be dealing with the same department and dealing with officials that he effectively were reporting to him. The ordinary person looking in, I think, would question that. Now, I understand in terms of procedures, and it would not be expected to occur. What can you do, I suppose, to ensure that to allay people that there's no conflicts of interest in terms of the whole procedures of dealing with Bank of Ireland going forward? And they're obviously entering a very critical phase, because they're obviously looking to go back as a private institution, and that's obviously our policy in terms of, but to give assurance to the public in that area, Mr. Moore, can you just, and I know you're looking at procedures, what can you put in place in that area?
Well, I think...
So if you give a direct answer to that question, and then we'll move to Deputy Ross.
Okay.
That would need to be.
I was acting as so.
Well, one of the things we'd like to do, as I said, is to try and look at this situation in the context of the changes that are taking place for the broader civil service, the changes that are taking place at the NTMA, and then look at our own sort of context, which is somewhat different in respect of both of those, and see that we can treat, because I think we should also be looking at people that are working in this unit, whether they work for the NTMA or whether they work for as a civil servant, they should in effect be subject to the same rules.
And can I just preface that by saying, I have no issue with people going from public to private. I think we need that interaction, but it's obviously, you made a reference to there, they were entering something that's new, and I think for that we have to have corporate governance structures, or want of a term, procedures that give confidence to the public.
Yeah, and I think there's a focus at the moment on this particular situation, but in some respects the same issue has been part of the system but perhaps less prevalent before, for many, many years, in that it's not just a question of banking. There could be people leaving another line department and going to work in another company where they have issues, or going to work with a consulting firm or whatever else it might be. So I think we have to look at those issues. I think we will need policy direction as to how we deal with the period of time, because the normal solution for this in areas where it has occurred more commonly, which is in the private sector, has been to require people to not engage in their new employment for, I suppose I would call it, a cooling off period, where the information that they have is no longer as sensitive. And in some respects, in areas like banking, it may in fact be as it can come quite quickly to a point of where you no longer have sensitive information, and we're very aware of that. But the solution in that respect is typically because you cannot allow the people to continue working, and you can't neither deprive them of the right to earn a living, then you have to in fact pay them for whatever that period is. And that itself creates dynamics that are difficult for people to understand, because then we would have a situation in which people continue to be paid while we don't want them to actually work in another area. And in fact, what we tried to do with Michael, and I think he was very happy to sort of, do that, is that rather than in effect lose his services to the state during the period of time that we were going to continue paying him, since we couldn't allow him to work in the banking sector effectively as soon as we knew he was no longer going to be working with us into the future, was that he moved back physically out of the department to be exposed less to information, down to work at the NTMA, and assisted the NTMA on some other tasks during that period of time.
Well, I would think, and I'll finish this, just to conclude, I would think going forward, if someone is coming into as sensitive a role as Mr. Toppy has come into, that there has to be procedures put in place, that you can't have someone like that going to a covered institution, as was with the bank, dealing with an area with the knowledge he would have in that particular until such a time.
I agree fully, but the only point I was trying to make is that I think that we can focus on Michael and the role he had in the bank, but it is equally important in respect of all other policy areas, because moving from any policy area into the private sector, or indeed, frankly, into sort of other areas, may give rise to similar conflicts, which is why the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform is looking at this as a reform matter across the entire civil service, and we'll input into that and make sure that...
Deputy Ross.
Thank you. And welcome, Mr. Moran. I read your opening address with interest. I think it would make Enda Kenny blush, to be honest. It was so upbeat and optimistic. But I'd like to get on to the... first of all, the recruitment policy. You employed, when you were doing your banking division, when you were starting out your banking division, you employed a large number of people from the NTMA, is that right?
There were people already employed in the NTMA, and we decided, in order to facilitate the operation of the department, that we would bring all those people together with the people that were formerly in the banking sector of the department.
Right. And was there a different pay structure for them when they came into you? Or did they retain the NTMA pay structure?
Yeah, no, they retained the NTMA structure because they were on, effectively, I think most of them are on short-term, or are on contracts that aren't normal contracts. They may be 2-year, 3-year contracts.
So
they remained in the NTMA as the NTMA employees, in effect, seconded to the department.
Okay, so they're working under a completely different remuneration type regime.
They may not be as different as you think, but yeah, they're working on...
They're paid higher. They're paid more.
Sorry?
They're paid more?
Not necessarily.
Some of them paid more?
I don't actually have all the details of the staff here in respect to their payments, but
they're paid in NTMA rates.
They're paid on NTMA rates,
rates,
under NTMA contracts.
Okay. And how did you recruit all the other banking division people?
Well, we've had a number of people join recently as part of our... We have had a recruitment campaign, I suppose is the word, in the department in the last year. Yeah. We've tried to upskill the people in terms of skills in the areas of economics and in the areas of banking and legal. And so we've had a number of people come in at AO level into the department. They came off of a panel which was set up by the civil service sort of appointments people. And some of those people would have been assigned to roles that are in what I referred to earlier as the peacetime banking policy areas and other policies.
They should be redundant.
Sorry?
They should be redundant.
We hope that they're very busy in soon. And the rest would be assigned if there were vacancies in the NTMA unit. And then the NTMA unit themselves have had a number of vacancies that they are working on filling, who will come in. For example, we talked quite a length of time about Michael Torpey's sort of departure, and he will be filled in the same sort of structure.
Yeah. I'm just trying to... Did you advertise these positions?
We haven't done that yet.
For none of the banking positions were advertised?
We have advertised some of them.
The AOs
Sorry, I just talked about Michael Torpey's position.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about Michael
Sorry,
Torpey's.
all of the AO positions and all those were done under normal recruitment processes.
Okay.
So there was a panel, there was a sort of a competition held to try and build an AO panel with certain different skills. So there were people that were economists, there were people that were in legal and people in banking.
Yeah.
And we were then able to select from those panels once the shortlists were done.
Okay, because I rang your department yesterday, and I asked them about, could we have a chart? Because, as you probably understand, you guys are a mystery to the outside world. We don't know how you operate or what you like. Could we have a chart of who does what in the department? And they said no. Is there any reason for that?
I think you'd find it very unusual to find it.
Well,
my own.
they wouldn't even, they said, look, on our website, they said you can find out who the top guys are and what they do. But beyond that, we're not going to give you any more. And I said, why? And they said, God, the public might ring us up and ask us questions. Right? Is it not possible that we could have a breakdown of who does what in the Department of Finance? And if you want to retain anonymity, which I'm not sure that you should, at least how many people you've got doing what in each department, how it operates.
We could certainly create a structure and provide information as to how many people are in each of the divisions, if you like. I mean, we have tried very hard to break down this question of sort of, you know, the public not understanding how the department actually operates.
Yeah.
I think in the last year, you know, we've produced sort of a statement of strategy. We've just issued a document today which sets out exactly what we've been doing under FA Goal and how we've changed the operation of the department. In terms of that, we're publishing more on our website than ever before. But if you would like a breakdown of the different number of people in each area, we can happily provide.
Yeah, it's what everybody does, the function.
But I would like not to do it by name.
Why?
Well, first of all, I think we'd have to get consent from people as to whether they're willing to do that. I don't have a problem. I don't think anyone here has a problem with us knowing who they are, because they're senior people.
Yeah.
In terms of that, when people turn up at the meetings, there's sort of, you know, numerous people at the table interacting with the public now. I think we also move people around quite frequently, because one of the other things we want to do is we want to try and break down the sense of people being just involved in one particular policy area. So, you know, we have a chart of our own, which is frankly itself a big exercise of keeping it up at the IT area, because people are moving around quite a lot. There are 350 people.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you would provide that. Well, you can provide that. We'll provide that.
There will be some detail by division in the REV Part 3 when it's published, the revised estimates volume. Which
Okay. But could we have a full one of what happens in the department?
I mean,
Could that be provided?
I don't have a problem. Let me take this up with people just to make sure there's nobody has a particular issue with it, of trying to actually break this down to a certain level, for example, assistant principal level or something like that. And we'll try and break it down. I mean, we have a plan to redo our entire website in the next couple of months. And therefore, part of that would be to be breaking down by division and by unit what each unit is doing, how it ties into the business plan, and if there's a desire to understand who to call or whatever more frequently in respect to specific matters, we can do that.
Yeah, but do you see what I mean? I'm looking for a complete and utter breakdown. And the anonymity issue, let's park that for a minute, of what happens and how many people are working in each section and who's reporting to who. How it works.
Yeah, I mean, there are two different issues. One is how do the units work and who do they report to?
Yeah.
That's a slightly different question, who exactly is reporting to which
Well, you want to retain the anonymity. I'm not in favour of that, but I can understand why you want to do it. But would you provide us with the information on how many people you've got in each department doing what?
What we will do is you'll see in the I think it's in the statement of strategy, certainly in the document today, how we have broken the area down into 6 areas.
Yeah.
Okay, 4 policy areas and 2 support
Yeah.
areas. I have
Yeah.
no problem with going below that. We've already put sort of more information out around what subcommittees we have and various other things and how it all stitches together.
Yeah.
I have no problem going down below that, for example, to another area, so you will see which areas report to Anne, which to Jim, and which to Derek and others.
And why would you go right down to the right?
Well, that will move quite a long way down.
How far?
Well, as I suggested, I think that the idea of sort of hitting at about the persistent principal level is probably, officially, I think we go to public principal officer in terms of delegation of responsibility.
Why won't you do the law?
I think I would first have to make sure that everybody's willing to do that. I think if I went at the moment on a website for anywhere else, I would find it difficult to find everybody in the entire organisation listed by name.
Well, okay, don't list them by name. Just give us a chart. Give us a tree. Tell us exactly how many people you've got, all the way down to the bottom of the department.
Let me try and do something.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. I'm interested in your relationship, as I think Deputy Harris was, with the banks for which you say you've got a responsibility. How do you decide how to vote at their AGMs?
When the AGM agenda would be decided, then effectively we would give advice to the minister, who would then decide how he would actually want the representative of the minister to vote in respect of those issues.
Is there consultation with the bank about that or not?
Well, no, because
Do you have an input into what resolutions are put forward to AGMs?
if we would have felt, I think, under company law that there was something that should be addressed, I think we would be able to do that, right?
Okay. But you don't have an input into anything else?
Well, we're about to go through AGM season, I suppose, at the
Correct.
moment, and therefore we'll have to look at it in terms of what we see. Up to now, we felt that the actual resolutions have been sufficient.
And when you're deciding on whether a director is re-elected, which is very much in your power, how do you make that decision?
Again, as I said, that would be a question for the minister. So it's a policy decision in that respect.
Yeah, but do you give him advice on it?
Well, we have had, I think everybody knows, in the past where we were appointing directors, we have gone out publicly and tried to create a panel of interested people so that he would therefore have an available choice in respect of whom he might want to appoint.
Yeah.
So that gives one option. There are other, he may prefer to appoint somebody separately.
But when
that
they're
at least
coming,
gives-
when they're coming for re-election, you give advice to the minister.
Yeah.
You do. And what criteria do you use?
Well, we would be looking at their performance.
And do you have meetings about that?
Well, I don't know if you hear, we have just said that we were now, in the last couple of months, engaging much more with the boards, in terms of, with the minister typically, in respect of the 2 priorities we have for all banks, which are, well, I mean, we have 3, I suppose, which is profitability, but we have 2 operational issues, which is their SME lending and their mortgages.
Sure, but these are important matters, and you give advice to the minister on these. And there are resolutions, as you know, every year, as there were last year and the year before, when you held this large share in Airbnb Bank of Ireland. Do you meet to discuss whether these people should be re-elected or not?
We're about to go through, I think...
No, do you? Have you done in the past?
In the past, we have met when we had situations of AGMs in the past, and we have a constant discussion with people.
On that, and you decide what...
We discuss lots of issues. I mean,
Yeah.
but that's one of them. When we get to an AGM, we have to discuss what we actually are going to do with respect to the votes.
Okay, no, that's fine. Can I get on to the issue of mortgages? In the, I think it's, yeah, in your review of AIB, you talk about significant progress in 2012. Mortgage arrears are rising, you say, at a much slower pace. Is it likely, you say here cost restructuring is underway, and then you say 50 branches have been closed, which you regard as an achievement, obviously. You go on to say 2,500 staff are departing and significant changes to benefits, which means that they're being downgraded, which you also regard as an achievement. Is it likely that there are going to be more repossessions this year?
I think on the question of repossessions, well, we have a technical problem to overcome in terms of the decision of the Justice Dunn in respect of repossessions. But I think it is surprising to us that there are so few repossessions in the system at the moment, given the extent of the crisis that we've been going through. We've had an unemployment rate that has gone as high as 15%, and it would be very uncharacteristic to have seen a situation. I think our repossession rate is running at less than 1/4% at the moment, whereas if you look at what's happening in other jurisdictions, even in the UK, I think it was 3%, in the US it was perhaps as much as 4 or 5%. And so it would be typical to have seen in a crisis as severe as we've had, more situations, both voluntary and in effect through the court system, where people would decide that holding on to, that the economics of paying their mortgage no longer work, and that in effect the maximum mortgage that they would be able to support, given their economic situation, would be less than the value of the house. And in that scenario, we would say that the resolution of that scenario should require, why refer to repossession? I refer to repossession to include voluntary surrender. But that is not a situation where the person should continue to remain in that house, but should try and seek an alternative arrangement.
I mean, you talk there about, okay, there's a technical problem with the Dunn case, you're right, I know, but that can be sorted by legislation in a drop of a hat. And it's taking a long time. Do I take it from that you're going to encourage the banks to repossess this year?
We will be encouraging the banks to seek resolution of the mortgage situation, as we do already.
No,
and that requires a large range of different options. And I think we have always said that there is no one solution that fits every situation. Okay? In a scenario where somebody works out that the maximum value that they can support as a mortgage in a sustainable way, so I'm not talking about a situation where somebody just loses their job and has a temporary shock to their income. I'm talking about somebody who is who, when you look over the medium to long term as to what is the mortgage that they can repay on a sustainable basis, and if the value of that mortgage is less than the value of the property that they're in, irrespective of negative equity and where it has gone, if it is less now than the value of the property they are in, then that is a situation in which essentially there should be a voluntary surrender of the house. That's not a situation in which you should write off, because that is not in the interest of the taxpayer, it's not in the interest of the banks, and therefore it's not in the interest of the people that are currently paying their mortgages.
Where's the legislation? At what point is the legislation now to resolve the Dunn situation, the Dunn court case?
Our colleagues over in Justice are primarily responsible for that, but there is a memo being prepared for government to resolve that situation.
And what's the timetable?
Oh, I would expect it's a matter of weeks, I think.
And then once that legislation is passed, it'll be free for all in terms of repossessions?
No, I think that first of all, the technical sort of amendment that needs to take place is itself not all mortgages. So I think that's an important thing. We are already seeing some surrendering of houses and indeed some sort of repossessions in the system. What I said earlier was unusual, but I think it is a feature of the fact that there were temporary measures put in place under the Code of Conduct from the Central Bank to defer the repossessions of houses, frankly, until such time as we were able to put in place all of the rest of the machinery that you need to resolve so large a crisis. So the personal insolvency legislation is in place, the system is being set up, I believe it will be operational towards the middle of this year. That will be a very important part of the toolkit to actually resolve this issue. And I think the central bank are looking at their code to sort of look now, with reference to all that, what is the appropriate level of balance. But I think it is always important to remember that the decisions of the banks should also be with respect to the profitability of the bank. And as I said, if there is a situation where somebody has an unsustainable mortgage, then the situation then needs to get resolved. Equally, in a situation where the debt is unsustainable, the bank needs to resolve that issue.
I take it from what you're saying that you're anticipating a large increase in repossessions in the next year or two.
If what you talk about...
Is that correct?
Well, I've just given you some statistics, okay?
Yes.
The Irish repossession situation is about less than 1/4%. Okay? The UK number is about 3%. So depending on how you want to play with the statistics, you could consider moving even from 0.25% to 1% as a very large increase, because it will be actually 4 times as many as we currently have. But you are starting from a base which is uncharacteristically and unnaturally low relative to the scenario in other similar situations. So I could give you numbers, I could look at it and imagine what would happen, and I could say, depending on how I wanted to present those numbers, I could describe that, as you did, as a very significant raise in repossessions, because even moving to 1%, which is still only 1/3 of the UK's number, you have done 4 times more.
Where are you anticipating us moving to?
I think one of the things we have been trying to... Sorry?
Will we go to 1%?
Well, I'm not going to just pick a number. I've just given you some of what has happened in other jurisdictions, so maybe we will move to those. We have had as severe a crisis in this area as anywhere else. So based on if you can take international parameters, you would go there. I think what we are missing still, and the central bank may have some better focus on this, is we are missing the individual breakdown per customer, which is actually what's required to answer the question you posed, because we need to know what are the situations for each individual borrower, because this is a situation that does not have sort of a magic wand to answer it all. It does not have a one-size-fits-all solution. And until such time as you can get the SFS from every customer, including those that aren't currently engaging with their banks to produce it, it's impossible to predict where the actual repossession or surrender should be.
Yeah. Okay, but if you make comparisons with the UK and say it's 3%,
you would expect to see more.
You say it's 1/4% here. Undoubtedly, what you're saying is that the banks are sitting waiting for this to happen, and as is the government, and they're going to kick people out of their houses pretty quickly once the legislation is through.
No, I think it is fair to say that the situation hasn't been resolved. But for the 1% that we talked about, there are also an awful lot of people who will in fact see banks move in terms of giving them appropriate relief. We've set out the various types of relief that we would recommend, including split mortgages, including dealing with interest only for periods of temporary loss of income. There will also be significantly larger numbers of people who will avail of those solutions once the banks start working through person by person where they need to go.
It seems to me like it's going to be a pretty grim scenario for some people, this debt resolution, if repossessions are going to multiply by 4.
With respect, I would describe the situation as a grim scenario at the moment for people.
That's not what you said in your... That's not what you said in what you wrote
with respect to the people that have a problem with their current mortgages and are not able to pay their mortgages, it is not a happy situation. What is required is that the banks engage with those people and that those people engage with their banks. I think we've seen the central bank explain that 70 or 75% of the people who are currently going through the MARS process describe it as satisfactory. Okay, we also have a large population of people who are not engaging with their banks at the moment today, and they need to engage. And it's only by working between those people, between the regulator and between the banks, that we will finally get to a situation which produces a better resolution for everybody. And in some cases, that will require people who are living in houses that are much larger than they are capable of supporting with their income to, in fact, potentially trade down from that house or move to rented accommodation. But that's not necessarily, as you describe it, a grim situation. That is a recognition of their financial position and a resolution, because ultimately it is the other people in the country that are paying for those people to remain in those houses, as long as they're not paying their mortgages. If they are able to pay the mortgage, if the mortgage that they can support is at least equal to the value of the house in which they are living today, so they are paying their mortgage like their neighbours, then in that scenario, the bank needs to also resolve any portion of the historical debt that is unsustainable for those people.
I take it from that there are going to be more repossessions. I think we can take that as a given from what you're saying. I know you won't say yes, but I can take it from what you're saying that we are going to have.
I have already said that the repossession numbers today are at unnaturally low level because of the fact that we have been trying to put all of the various pieces in place for a proper resolution of this across the system. And now that those pieces are falling into place, the banks can actually move, or should move forward, to resolve more and more customers, to up their level of engagement with customers, so that we can seek resolution of it across all the different scenarios and solutions we've proposed.
Okay, thank you. Could you talk to me about recapitalisation of the banks a bit? I think the general government and Department of Finance line is that recapitalisation of the banks as a result of the mortgage arrears is not going to be necessary. Is that correct?
The banks were recapitalised when the PCAR occurred on the assumption of, well, you know this as well as I do, a base and a stress scenario. And we have not fallen below the stress scenario at this stage. And if that were to happen, if that were not to happen, then the recapitalisation should be sufficient for the banks as they go through the next PCAR.
The next stress tests are due this year.
That's right.
Why were they put off?
The stress tests at the moment are aligned with the EBA stress tests, because our banks, as we see it, for some time now, have continued on this path of normalisation and therefore should be treated the same as other European banks.
I mean, because, well, I'm not sure that they should be, but there are a lot of global commentators, including Martin Wolf of the Financial Times and others, who've been very vocal about this recently and just said that we are absolutely certainly going to have to recapitalise our banks further, contrary to the political line that's being peddled here. Do you think he's wrong?
He didn't say it to me when I met him in London
No,
recently.
he might not, but you mightn't read everything he writes either.
There are lots of commentators who say lots of things. There are some that say
Yeah.
we should absolutely default and the economy would never go back into growth, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
But
we
you don't
rely
believe-
upon.
You don't believe we're going to have to recapitalise the banks?
I have said that we have seen a recapitalisation of the banks, which was done on the basis of a base and a stress test. And if you look at where property prices are, if you look at where unemployment are, we are within the parameters of those. How you exactly set up the stress test, we would like to see the banks, I think I mentioned it earlier, I don't even hear, move on their cost structures. That will also help the profitability of the banks and their ability to, in fact, raise capital on their own by self-generation. And so there are a lot of moving parts in respect to this, and it would be certainly not wise of me to try and imagine what the situation will be in 9 months' time.
Well, the minister has, Brendan Howland has stated quite categorically he doesn't think the banks will need any further recapitalisation.
And he may be right.
Do you agree with him?
I said he may be right.
But do you agree with it? You're in an important position to be able to make a judgment.
At the moment, what we're assuming is that if the external parameters that are at play here continue to go as they are, we can see where the stress tests were, and we are within that. You may be aware that some of the banks have had a situation where considerable capital has been saved as a result of the deleveraging taking place at prices that weren't as severe as we expected, and therefore they have a buffer of capital. Even the decision we took in the last couple of weeks to remove the guarantee has itself changed quite dramatically the capitalization projections of the banks, because there is an additional €1 billion of, in effect, value in the banks each year.
Okay. Could you tell me what effect that's had, that removal of the guarantee on the banks, particularly the Bank of Ireland? Does it give them more autonomy?
The relationship framework for the bank has not changed at all, so the autonomy is the same.
The autonomy is the same?
Yeah, but the autonomy and the level of engagement is the same.
Because you've still got the same shareholding?
We still have the same shareholding, we still have the same relationship framework.
Okay. So the guarantee doesn't make any difference in that way?
The removal of the guarantee doesn't make any impact, except that it should improve the profitability of the bank, and therefore it should improve the value of our shareholding.
So it doesn't give them any more commercial freedom?
We have not changed or amended the relationship framework with Bank of Ireland at all in the context of it.
Okay. Could we move on then to the deal that was brokered in Europe early last week on bonuses, which the government here made some play of, saying that it was done under their presidency. And the deal brokered, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, was that bonuses should be basically on a one-for-one basis for bankers, and not 1-for-1 salary to bonus to salary. But it should be 2-for-1 if it had shareholder agreement. Is that correct?
That's the broad parameter, yeah.
How is that going to apply to Ireland?
In terms of the Irish
it going to
government
apply
banks
to
or in
Ireland?
terms of all banks?
Is it going to apply to Ireland, Irish bankers?
Well, the rules will apply to all Irish banks and indeed to all operations. They apply to all European sort of banks to which the directive applies, including Irish banks.
So bonuses
But we
are
have a situation where there are no bonuses in Irish banks at the moment, so it's
Yeah.
relatively easy to apply the rules.
But bonuses will be back then?
But that's a matter for ultimately for the remuneration committees and the management. So if you have an Irish bank which has nothing to do with the state, they can pay bonuses if they would like. They probably are at the moment.
And what about the state banks?
At the moment, we have still got the same restrictions we've had in respect to bonuses on the banks.
Yeah, but when these rules come into effect, which you guys brokered,
These rules are like a cap or a maximum situation. They do not permit bonuses. Sorry, they do permit bonuses. They don't require bonuses to be paid to those levels. So the government are perfectly within their rights, despite these rules, to take a view